The big, beautiful bill, what we need to know, Senator Ron Johnson explains in under 60 seconds.
Yeah, I've sent out the 30-page report to everybody I know because I hear questions in the conference yesterday. Well, what would happen if we have 3% growth? You know, Secretary Besson kind of in his head kind of went through and said it would be about $4 trillion. By the way, he was right. In my report, it shows about 3.8. But if you would have read my report, you wouldn't even had to ask that question. So, you know, Sean, I've been beating my head against the wall, banging this drum since my first article in the Wall Street Journal about pre-pandemic levels of spending. It's been largely ignored by everybody. They're not willing to take the second step in solving a problem. I think everybody acknowledges we've got a problem, but then they immediately deny the extent of it. So they're not willing to properly define it. The way the problem has been defined here in Congress is the only numbers that matter are 218 and 50.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
No. The numbers that matter are $1.9 trillion a year deficit, going up to 2.1 and 2.5 up to 2.8 and 9 based on these different scenarios.
All right, guys, good Wednesday to you. We've made it over halfway through the work week. And it's, you know, one of those weekends where you're heading into a holiday weekend, but it's Trump world. So does that really count? Because the Senate's going to be voting, and the holidays at the end of the week, but you know, it's still a holiday week. So this is sort of going to be a weird little influx of time. I think a lot of people thought we'd be going to war right now. Not so. President Trump making it very clear. He's overseas in the Netherlands for this G7. And I'll tell you, I've traveled with him quite a bit between the campaign and the White House. And he's not a fan, I would say, of spending the night places that aren't his. And this G7 meeting over in the Netherlands, I think he was actually excited to go to, because this is real results for him. Obviously, on the Iran strikes, that was a big deal in itself. We're going to talk about that. And then on the G7. So I want to cover a couple things with you guys. Iran and the G7. I'll put that in one bucket. I want to talk to you a little bit about the New York mayoral race last night, because I think that was big. And then the big, beautiful bill. And then Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin, he's here. And you guys know, I mean, Ron Johnson has been no huge fan of the big, beautiful bill in the sense that he is a guy that has been very concerned about the cost. He is a business background. This is his thing. And Ron Johnson's going to talk to us about where it stands, because Senator John Thune, the majority leader, wants to jam the vote and just kind of get them to do what they call like a vote-a-thon and just vote throughout the weekend until this thing passes. And then, let's be honest, they want to jam the House, send it over there and dare them not to vote. I'm not so certain about this. I think that this is a little bit more complicated than that. There's some big number issues with the Senate alone and some problems. They don't have the math isn't there, period, right? The cost of the bill has gone up because of the way reconciliation works in the Senate parliamentarian rules on things, because you can't actually do policy in the bill, if that makes sense. It's a weird tool that they're using. So normally you need 60 votes. Reconciliation is 50 because it limits what you can do. So you can't do like appropriations on regular government stuff. You can address taxes and mandatory spending. And the Senate parliamentarian will come in and rule and say, I don't like that. That's not compliant, etc. And as she has done this, her name's Elizabeth McDonough, it changes the cost. And suddenly the cost of this bill has gone up. And so the Senate's trying to square that. Some of it's gimmickry, just to be blunt. Some of it is real. And so they're trying to figure out how to do this and balance it, but then send it back to the House. I think we have a problem. And it's going to be interesting how this goes. And that's why I'm so excited about this conversation I'm about to have with Ron Johnson, because they can lose 3 senators. And off the top of my head, you got a Ron Johnson problem, and we'll talk to him about what it's going to take to get him on board. Tom Tillis from North Carolina has a Medicaid problem. I think Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, not bobbling up to the top these days, he's going to have a problem on the Medicaid stuff. And then you've got Josh Hawley with some Medicaid problems, and he is from Missouri. So now you've got, 4? Then you've got Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski that are always have problems because of cuts, etc. Now you're at 6. Rand Paul is 7. He just has an overall issue with the debt ceiling and spending. So you can only lose 3, and I just gave you 7. That's a problem. Then you got to get the House on board, and they've got an issue with the state and local tax deduction. We call it SALT. Anyway, I'm going to run through a lot of this with Ron Johnson in terms of the issues and the process, so stay tuned. But Trump's over in the Netherlands, and I want to play you this clip of the Secretary General of NATO talking about the impact that Donald Trump has had on the world and on NATO. Take a look.
It will also be a massive achievement in making NATO fairer. For decades, the United States sought to get Europe to truly step up. Now, European allies and Canada will equalize their defense spending with the United States. So let me salute President Trump's long-standing leadership in calling for NATO to increase defense spending. Today, I am pleased to announce that NATO has already added an additional $1 trillion in defense spending over the past decade. Mr. President, dear Donald, that is thanks to you pushing us. And tomorrow we will build on that foundation and add trillions more in defense spending, because we need to do this.
Stop for a second and just think about what he just said. The media and elitist types keep saying, oh, Trump's backing out of NATO. He's not showing a commitment. Let's remember what NATO is. It's a commitment of countries as a hedge against the Soviet Union, by the way, to bolster their own defenses. At the time, 2%. To say we will invest in our own defenses, 2% of our GDP, to make sure that we are stronger as a hedge against what was then the Soviet Union. And in return, an attack against one is an attack against others. For decades, other countries, Spain, Slovakia, our neighbors to the north in Canada, have said, why would we spend money on defense when the U.S. will do it for us? The U.S. will take care of us. Big brother, daddy, whatever you want to call it. We got it. Why don't we spend money on the stuff that we want to spend money on? Our own roads and bridges, welfare, who cares? The U.S. got our back. That's not the deal. And Donald Trump's the only one who made them live up to their obligations. So every time the media whines and wrings their hands about NATO's commitment, just remember, Europe needs to stand up for Europe. That's the deal they signed up for. We said we'll have your back, but you have to do your part. No one else made this happen but Donald Trump. I get it's not traditional. There's no PowerPoint presentation. There's no, we would expect the kind sir to do the, you know what? He played hardball and he won. Doing the same thing on tariffs. He did the same thing on Iran. I get that that's not what's supposed to happen. That's not how it normally works. But it gets results. Stop worrying about the process and tell the whiny babies in the elite class to shut up. This is Donald Trump this morning in the Netherlands talking about that very commitment. Take a look.
Over the past 2 days, I was honored to participate in the NATO leaders meeting, and also had extremely good individual discussions with the King and the Queen, Secretary General Rutte, and the Prime Minister. Great discussions, very knowledgeable people. Major focus of our conversations at the summit was the need for other NATO members to take up the burden of the defense of Europe, and that included the financial burden. As you know, it was 2%. And we got it up to 5%. And they said, a couple of them came up to me. One in particular said, sir, we've been trying to get it up to 3% for 20 years, and we haven't been able, and you got it up to 5%. So they're going to be, most of them, I guess almost all of them, are going to be contributing now 5%, a number that people are surprised at, but you need it today. The United States accounts for 2/3 of all NATO defense spending. And since I began pushing for additional commitments in 2017, believe it or not, our allies have increased spending by $700 billion. I said to people, you don't have any money, and a lot of them weren't paying. And so I started the process, and I picked it up as soon as I got back, which is 6 months ago. And following my election last November, almost all have accelerated plans to reach the 2%, 3%, 4%, and then ultimately, very quickly, 5%. And all of this is going to be done very quickly, almost immediately. You probably know this as well as I do. I'm sure they've been talking about it. It's really been a big focus. In a very historic milestone this week, the NATO allies committed to dramatically increase their defense spending to that 5% of GDP, something that no one really thought possible. And they said, "You did it, sir, you did it." Well, I don't know if I did it, but I think I did. This will be known as the Hague Defense Commitment, which is pretty good, pretty appropriate. When the allies reach this number, it will add more than $1 trillion a year. Think of that, $1 trillion per year to our common defense. And this is a monument really to victory, but it's a monumental win for the United States because we were carrying much more than our fair share. It was quite unfair, actually. But this is a big win for Europe and for actually Western civilization.
Now, just to keep in context here, when he's saying it's unfair, the U.S. is shouldering over 2/3 of the defense budget for this effort. 2/3. You think that sounds fair? The whole idea, remember, was against the Soviet Union attacking Europe, not the United States. We're carrying the burden. It's time that they started putting up. Now, that in itself should be monumental news. That's huge. But it's against the backdrop of what happened with Iran, which, again, is monumental news. Everybody was talking about the fact, as you recall, last week, the president's going to get us in this huge war, World War III, troops on the ground. This is all going to happen. President Trump said, "Trust me, I've got a third way. I can take them out, bring them back to the table, and boom." And he did it. So far, the ceasefire, and all they do is doubt him every step of the way. I go back to the campaign when he announced he'll never run, he'll never file, he'll never win a primary. Boom, boom. Every time they talk about Trump, it's always betting against him. And he defies the odds every time, politically and policy-wise. And once again, this week, he can't do it. It'll never happen. They can't do this. This is not an option. You got to go in. You got to do this. This is what will happen. He has a precision, effective strike. Iran quivers. Oh, my God. And now what do? The New York Times and CNN, oh, well, it's not as effective as we thought. The intelligence. You know what? It's unbelievable. These folks, the satellite imagery is what it is. It shows the effects of those bombs. Over a dozen 30,000-ton bombs dropped on those sites. What do you think the possible outcomes are? Now, here's what I'll tell you. The satellite imagery is very clear. There was massive damage. We will know in the months to come, I think largely based on the Israeli intelligence. They've got what they call the human intelligence that will go in and look at this. But there is no question, whether it's 2 years or 10 years, that the capabilities of the Iranians to enrich weapons is way far delayed. Now, if they're smart, they'll stop entirely because they realize they'll get hit again. And our intelligence and the Israelis' intelligence is solid. But the New York Times and CNN couldn't help themselves. Oh, they're starting to question it. Same people who said it couldn't be done. They've got to figure out what's the next way that we question them on. Well, the president this morning at the press conference plays down these attempts and shows them to their face what's happening. Take a look.
A letter just came in and a statement came in from the Atomic Energy Commission of Israel. And I just wondered, this is an official letter, and they're very serious people, as you know. The devastating U.S. strike on Fordo destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility totally inoperable. It was devastated. We assess that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for many years to come. This achievement can continue indefinitely if Iran does not get access to nuclear material, which it won't. It's so sad that whole thing had to go. But I just want to thank our pilots. You know, they were maligned and treated very bad, demeaned by fake news CNN, which is back there, believe it or not, wasting time, nobody's watching them. So they're just wasting a lot of time, wasting my time.
Well, the satellite imagery is clear enough. And they all want to split hairs. Are they degraded entirely or a ton? I mean, Just remember this over and over again. These people are consistently wrong about everything, politically and policy. And yet they never cease to amaze themselves with just forgetting how wrong they are and coming back and questioning something else again. The Israelis are backing it up. They're the ones with the best intelligence, just to be clear, because they have the ability to get into Iran. We don't have a ton of assets in Iran. That makes sense. They do. Just remember that, though. These guys, they hate to be wrong. They hate that Trump is proving them so inept at what they do. Two other things I want to cover before Ron Johnson kicks off. Number one, big race in New York City last night. Cuomo running, right? Former governor, completely disgraced. And he gets upended by a 33-year-old dude named Zohran Mamdani. Now, this guy, literally just outworked him. He was endorsed by Bernie Sanders, AOC, is an avowed socialist communist. This is the person that they want to lead that city. The Democrats, and by the way, massively anti-Semitic. The Democrats own this guy now. He wants to have the government take over grocery stores in New York City. He wants to, have the government take over all of the assets in New York from different aspects of way of life. This is insane. And as I said, he's highly anti-Semitic. He has sympathized with communism and socialism. The Democrats own this man now. This is their standard bearer going forward. And I think if Republicans are smart, they put a microphone in every single Democrat's face the same way that they do to us and make them own him. This is your face now. AOC, Bernie Sanders, all of the socialism, this is what you have embraced. And to Democrats out there that are disgusted by this, the water's warm. Jump in. Come on over. Okay? I just say this. Watch this thing going forward because this is a huge black eye. And I know Democrats are going to try to pivot and figure out what they can do now. But do not let them get away with it. This is a bad hombre. He is a socialist, a communist, and an anti-Semite. And we need to hold them accountable. The same way they make up crap about us. This is for real. The videos are there. The receipts are there. We know who he is. Don't let him hide from his past. All right. This is going to be a big week for the big, beautiful bill. And Ron Johnson, Senator from Wisconsin, who's been clear from the beginning what his priorities are, fighting for fiscal discipline and the budget, is going to join us in just a second. But Senate Majority Leader Thune, I just want to set the table for you guys, is making it very clear. We're going full steam ahead. They're going to start voting this weekend, probably late tomorrow, in through the weekend, and they want to get it done. I don't know. Anyway, we'll get to this in a second. And then just send it over to the House. I get what they're trying to do, but the math just isn't there. And this is going to be a big kabuki dance to get it over the finish line. I'm just telling you this now, guys. This is not going to happen. The White House yesterday putting out an amazing fact sheet. And I'm not saying, just so you're clear, I want this to pass. It needs to pass. But this is a big deal, and Republicans need to focus on the positives. Get out there. It's very, very popular. Remember, we're talking about a 15% tax cut for Americans earning between $30,000 and $80,000. No tax on overtime or tips. Tax breaks for seniors. Made in America tax breaks. The largest standard deduction. And by the way, as a side note, remember, if we don't pass this, taxes will rise on 2/3 of Americans. Because the tax cuts from Trump's first term, the 2017 tax cuts, will expire. They will sunset. And what the beautiful part of this bill is that it is making all of this permanent. That's the key thing. We don't have to fight the fight again. They sold Trump a bill of goods last time. Oh, we can only extend them for 5 or 7 or 8 years. This time it's permanence. These things bolster the child tax credit, support working families, establish Trump investment accounts for newborns. It creates a savings account for every American from child that's born in America now. It improves housing affordability, supports family farms, empowered school choices. It drives economic growth, incentivizes made in America manufacturing. It boosts American business, expands opportunity zones, and promotes growth, doubles the small business expensing that's allowed right now under current law. There's some big, huge things. It is not perfect. I get that. But understand this. If we don't pass it, it's a massive tax increase, and we can't allow that. All right, before I bring in Ron Johnson, a couple housekeeping issues. Tomorrow, an amazing panel. We're going to break down all the events of the week. There's a lot to get to, as you can imagine. And then Friday, I'm really excited about this. So first, I'm going to bring on Mick Mulvaney, former chief of staff, Freedom Caucus member, congressman from South Carolina, to give us a lay of the land and to where the big, beautiful bill is. But then secondly, there's a professor out of Texas who is a Bernie Sanders supporter and wrote a book that I got my hands on that says, you know what, you may not like Trump, but the way the media has conducted themselves is a travesty. And he breaks down every one of the hoaxes and the lies and the narratives against Trump and explains the reality of them in the history. I'm telling you guys, this is not a book that is on the New York Times bestseller list or got a lot of attention. I stumbled upon it. And I called this guy up and I said, I need you to come on my show and explain to people what's going on, because this is not some Trump dude who's here to like be a Trump sycophant. He's actually quite the opposite, but he's saying, hey, this is how bad the media is. And even me, a Bernie Sanders guy. So trust me, on Friday, you're going to want to watch this. And I'm just so excited about this. All right, before I bring in Ron Johnson, I do want to tell you about another great guy. And you've been watching the show for a long time. You know who I'm talking about. My buddy Leo Grillo at Delta Rescue. Delta Rescue is an amazing, amazing group. Leo Grillo rescued one Doberman years ago, and he named the Doberman Delta, and that stood for Dedication, Everlasting Love to Animals. And then he thought to himself, I can do a lot more. So we formed Delta Rescue. And if you go to deltarescue.org, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. There's these amazing videos. It's all sorts of animals, dogs, cats, horses, you name it. And they can be abused, abandoned, neglected, malnutrition. It doesn't matter. Leo takes them all in. And it's become the world's largest no-kill sanctuary for life. This is not a way station. They're not looking to get them adopted or a shelter. Leo does God's work with animals. He takes care of them all for life. And there are no USAID grants. There's no Politico Pro subscription. It is all through donations from people like me and you, animal lovers who love this mission. I've rescued 3 dogs myself. I've had conversations with Leo. I've personally donated because I believe that much in what Leo Grillo is doing at Delta Rescue. If you go to deltarescue.org, you'll see the videos, you'll see what I'm talking about, and please join me in making a personal contribution to help the work that Leo's doing. Because if we don't stand up for the things that we believe, no one will. This is not like some government handout. This is me and you supporting a great cause and a great institution that Leo Grillo has built. Go to deltarescue.org. Please consider a contribution. Also, while you're there, go click the estate planning kit. See if it's right for you. Make a decision if it fits in with your financial planning to help this become an enduring mission. Maybe you have an old 401k, an old stock. Talk to a financial planner, but go to deltarescue.org. Make a contribution. Click on that estate planning kit. All right, guys, the weekend is coming up. Last weekend, I love getting on the grill. That's my thing. And I love steaks and hot dogs, to be honest with you. And I crushed it. But I can only take so much credit. I'd love to say that it was all me on the grill. But if you are a griller or love steaks, you know what I'm talking about. You can only do so much. You can do a lot with how you grill, but it's the quality of the meat that matters. And I came across Riverbend Ranch steaks. Oh my goodness. These things are unbelievable. I have been to a lot of restaurants, and everyone in my family who joined me was like, where did you get these things? That's how good. The marbling, the tenderness. And oh, by the way, there is none of that anti-hormone growth crap that is injected into most steaks. That's the reality. This stuff is so good. I'm not kidding. I cannot tell you how amazing this is. I cooked the ribeye, the strip, I cooked a little filet mignon, and the hot dogs. Holy smokes, what a game changer. These things are aged for a minimum of 21 days. They are more tender and flavorful than you'll ever find in a restaurant. These guys have been 35 years producing a much greater degree of excellence than anywhere else. And you can't just find this in stores. They raise their cattle totally different. They never use the hormones or the antibiotics. They pasture their cattle in Montana and Wyoming and handle their animals with humanely and with respect. You can't buy it in stores. It's shipped directly from the ranch to you. You get a much better price than going through a bunch of middlemen. Order directly from riverbendranch.com and use promo code to get $20 off. Riverbendranch.com. The 4th of July is coming up. It's time to get that order. And by the way, the beef jerky is amazing too. If your kids like hot dogs the way mine do, you will not be disappointed. Riverbendranch.com. All right, without further ado, I want to bring in this senator from Wisconsin, the Honorable Ron Johnson. Senator Johnson, always good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Well, Sean, thanks for having me on.
All right, before I get to the big, beautiful bill, your analysis of it, the report that you put out, I just want to, big day for the president over there in the Netherlands, both the G7 getting commitments from NATO and revealing these additional reports from Israel on the battle damagement assessment that was done. What are your thoughts on both?
Well, first of all, I completely support President Trump's position that Iran can never be a nuclear power. The series of events starting with basically, I'm sure, Iran giving Hamas the green light to butcher Israelis on October 7th. That led to just a series of events of Hamas being degraded, if not destroyed, then Hezbollah, the Houthis, then Iran stupidly fired missiles directly from Iran into Israel, which certainly prompted Israel to take out their air defense system. So Iran was in a very weakened state. Whether there was an assessment they were going to create a bomb within a week, or 2 weeks, or 3 months, or a year, we had the opportunity to take that capability out. I hope we did. It might take some time in terms of full assessment. Did they move some of that nuclear material? We just really don't know at this point in time. It sounds like the military is very confident that we obliterated the site, but again, did they have some other secret site that nobody knows about? Again, I don't know. But I think the world's a safer place because of it. Completely support President Trump's decision to do so. I was with him in the Oval Office a couple of days ago, and first thing I told him is, I said, "Listen, you continue to be in my prayers, and this is one of the reasons. I value you as president. Those are tough decisions to make. And I think you made the right one."
Yep, so I agree. And I think this NATO commitment today, look, to me is a big deal, just from the sense that everyone in Washington on the elitist side has got their hand wringing. Oh, you can't treat NATO this way. And it's like, are we supposed to just be picking up the tab for these guys? And yet here we go, President Trump hammering it for 10 years now that NATO needs to actually not just pick up more of the tab, but actually follow through on the commitments that they themselves made. And now we're seeing it finally.
Well, I was with an administration official a couple of days ago as well. And I don't want to name him because I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but basically they're laying out, you take a look at what we've spent on defense of the world versus what other people haven't spent, pretty well explains our deficit. Again, I've got to check those numbers, but it was well into the 20 trillions of dollars. And that's basically true. We've paid a heavy price here in America for defending the world. And listen, we are the world's superpower. I think that does put extra burden on us, keep the shipping lanes open, that type of thing. But that's something our allies have to recognize as President Trump is trying to negotiate trade deals, as he's trying to get them to carry more of the burden of their own defense. It's a very legitimate point to make. And it's one I hadn't heard made, and so I thought it was pretty unique and interesting.
It is. Well, you bringing up the deficit is a perfect segue into what I really wanted to get into today with, which is the big, beautiful bill, the status of it, your concerns. You guys, your office issued a really compelling report. We're going to put the links in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go back and see what Senator Johnson's team put together, let's just start with this. You lay out some really compelling stuff in graphic ways. Like anyone with eyes can look at what you guys put out on these charts to show what our spending has been, what it will be, and what the drivers of it are. So I just want to start with this. You make a very compelling case about where we've gone, particularly since COVID. How has that been received among your colleagues on the Republican side?
Well, let me first state, I wrote that report 100% myself. All the charts, I do have people that do the charts, but I give them the information, the data. I did the spreadsheets that did the the projections on different growth rates, that type of thing. So in case there's anything wrong, I don't want my staff being blamed for that. This is on me.
This is what happens when you actually have a businessman in the Senate.
And an accountant,
That's true.
So the most important numbers in that report, it's 30 pages, is focusing on the 10-year projected deficits. We can get so wrapped up in current law, current policy. People can use it in a very misleading fashion. I think they do, whether they intend to or not. It just gets so confusing. We talk about all these CBO scores. I'm not a real big fan of the CBO, but you have to have some kind of baseline. So you start with the CBO's 10-year baseline that they issued in January of this year, and they project a deficit from 2025 to 2034, that 10-year period, of $21.1 trillion. So back up. The 7 years prior to COVID, our average deficit was $660 billion. Still too high, but $660 billion. Then we had COVID, bipartisan blowout and spending, a deficit of $3.1 trillion. Now, a rational administration, a sane president, and Democrats in Congress would have reduced spending and deficits back to that pre-pandemic level, right? They didn't do that. We went from $4.4 trillion of spending in 2019 up to 6.5 the year of the pandemic, and average 6.5 for the next 5 years. This year we'll spend over $7 trillion. Next year, 7.3. So that's a 58% increase. And again, no American family would do that. If they had an illness, they had to borrow $50,000 to pay for medical bills. If the family member got well, you wouldn't keep borrowing $50,000 spent at that level. But that's what the federal government did. So Biden averaged, okay, from $660 billion prior to the pandemic, till 4 years after, under the Biden administration, we averaged deficits of $1.9 trillion.
So it's double.
More, it's triple. It's basically triple. 660 to 1.9, it's triple.
Oh, 1.9, I'm sorry. This is why I didn't take math in college, sorry.
That's fine. I'm an accountant. I'm here to check you. So anyway, 1.9. So you would think a Republican administration, Republican Congress would want to really address that and bring those down to a reasonable pre-pandemic level, both spending and deficits. Again, the CBO baseline is $21.1 trillion, $2.1 trillion per year. The CBO score on the One Big Beautiful Bill puts that at 24.1. Now you can quibble, so $2.4 trillion deficits average per year. Now you can quibble that they base that on a 1.8 or 1.8% growth, but for the last 25 years we've only grown on average 2.21%. So how realistic is to maintain 3% or higher? So anyway.
But just, can I stop you on that point? Because in your report, you do show
let me finish this.
Yeah.
So 21.1 trillion, 2.1 average to 24.1. The White House's memo from June 7th, I think it was, where they lay out their scenario, their score of their One Big Beautiful Bill, they put total deficit at $18.6 trillion. So an average deficit of 18.6 per year, just under the 1.9 trillion. So again, I lay out different scenarios, what it's going to actually take, what level of pre-pandemic spending. They're all reasonable to even just start bending the deficit curve down. But that's kind of what that report's all about.
In the report, you show in the 90s, we did exceed 3% growth. To me, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like even if we get there, to your point, we still have a massive deficit, and that's just masking a spending problem.
Right. I mean, I put in there a scenario of 3% growth. And it somewhat flattens out that curve, but you're still averaging over $2 trillion per year, right around $2 trillion per year. 4% growth, now you start bending the deficit curve down. But again, we haven't had 4% growth since the 1960s, over a decade. And one of the things I point out in that report is Reinhart and Rogoff wrote a book, This Time Is Different, basically saying, no, it's not. And they just lay out nation after nation that got themselves into this huge debt to GDP problem. Once you hit 90% external debt to GDP, you really are impacting growth. Is that what's been happening? Because we had excess 4% growth during the 60s, probably Kennedy's tax cuts. Then we averaged, I think, 3.2 for the rest of the decade. Now we've been averaging 2.21%. We went from Obama, when I came into Congress in 2011, we were $14 trillion in debt, and we were paying a couple $100 billion a year in interest. Now we're paying over $1 trillion a year in interest. And again, the more that debt ramps up, the more creditors look at America and say, we'll loan you money, but not at that rate. And that's what's happening. Okay, they're not loaning us long anymore. It's shorter term T-bills. We have to refinance. We have to refinance $9 trillion this year of the $37 trillion debt. We're turning over probably lower price debt for higher interest rate debt. Again, that all ends up being really complicated as well. But again, we just have a lot of risk in terms of higher interest rates, higher interest expense, bigger deficits. And again, as much, and I told the president I'd be more positive about this. I basically agree with the House bill. We extend current tax law. We take an automatic tax increase off the table. We avoided default. We provide border funding, greater defense, because Democrats aren't going to do appropriations. So we got to make sure we have enough defense spending. Where I quibble with them is they picked $1.5 trillion of spending reduction out of the air. It's just not. It doesn't meet the moment. It's just completely inadequate. We increased spending more than $2 trillion in 1 year. We're not even reducing spending by that amount over 10. So the spending increase was an order of magnitude larger than what we're laying in terms of spending reduction. It's just not adequate.
Oh, okay. So, and again, I just want to run through this quickly because there's a lot to get to. Go back to what I asked. This is not debatable. What you laid out in this report are facts and figures under different scenarios. Here's the growth. This is what it gets you. You literally have a chart for everything. Here's the CBO. Here's the White House score. Here's the joint tax, right? This gets back to the question I asked you. When you show this to your colleagues, are they in denial of the problem or the solution?
They don't look at it. I've sent out the 30-page report to everybody I know because I hear questions in the conference yesterday. Well, what would happen if we have 3% growth? Secretary Besson kind of in his head kind of went through and said it would be about $4 trillion. By the way, he was right. In my report, it shows about 3.8. But if you had read my report, you wouldn't even had to ask that question. So, Sean, I've been beating my head against the wall, banging this drum since my first article in the Wall Street Journal about pre-pandemic levels of spending. It's been largely ignored by everybody. They're not willing to take the second step in solving a problem. I think everybody acknowledges we've got a problem, but then they immediately deny the extent of it. So that they're not willing to properly define it. The way the problem has been defined here in Congress is the only numbers that matter are 218 and 50.
Yeah, exactly.
No. The numbers that matter are $1.9 trillion a year deficit, going up to 2.1 and 2.5 up to 2.8 and 9 based on these different scenarios.
It's funny. I got this quote from a meeting that you had on August 1st, 2013, during a White House meeting with Obama. And this is what I have. You tell me if I'm right. President Obama says to you, Ron, we can't show the American public numbers that big. If we do, I should do it in an Obama voice. If we do, they'll get scared and give up hope. Besides, Ron, we can't do all the work. We have to leave some for future presidents and future Congresses. I'm blown away. This is 11, almost 12 years ago. And the president of the United States says, we can't tell the American people we're this screwed, and let's leave some of the problem for others.
And of course, we're $20 trillion further in debt. Our deficits are much larger. Back then, the interest was $221 billion a year. Now it's over $1 trillion. So when I met with the president of the White House on Monday, that's the thing I gave him. I gave him that picture of myself, Kelly Ayotte, and Bob Corker with that quote. I think he got the point I was trying to make. Is this is no time to shy away from describing to the American public. This is the hole we have dug ourselves. What we are doing, mortgaging our children's future, is unconscionable. It is immoral. We have to face up to that reality. Especially us old folks. The theft, the intergenerational theft that has been going on from the old taking from the young. It can't go on. This has to stop. If I were a young person, I'd be so PO'd at us oldsters.
Yeah. It's funny in the chart. There's this one little blip that you point out. You literally have an arrow that says Tea Party.
Right.
What did the Tea Party do well? Because it was during Obama. We now have all of Republicans controlling Congress. That was Obama. What did the Tea Party do well then that we could do now?
We were obstinate. So little history. Bush averaged $250 billion a year deficits during his entire 8 years. Then Obama came in and averaged $1.27 trillion in his first term. That sparked the Tea Party. I'm part of the Tea Party. We came in and we said, we're going to shut the government down. Now, it was divided government, so Obama had to work with this. So we put the brakes on things. We literally, Obama went from $3 trillion in spending the last year of Bush to 3.5. If you remember the big, beautiful stimulus bill, right? Didn't really purchase infrastructure. But he took it from 3 trillion to 3.5. We held spending flat for 5 years at 3.5 trillion. So again, in his second term, Obama averaged deficits of $550 billion. We literally reduced that deficit spending by about $800 billion just by putting pressure, being obstinate, digging our heels and say, we're not going to fund government. We're not going to sign those appropriation bills. This is insane. It has to stop. Then, Trump came into office, he had divided government. He had to deal with Democrats. So those deficits started inching up. But again, for 7 years prior to the pandemic, $660 billion. Last 4 years, 1.9, and we're projected to go over 2 trillion as far as the eye can see. This, again, it's unsustainable. So my role in this process is just forcing everybody to acknowledge that reality. First step in solving a problem, admit you have it. Second step, properly define it. Then you start doing root cause analysis before you ever hop on solutions. Our problem is we're doing it the same old way.
Yeah.
You bundle up into big bill. You put in there must-pass things that must pass. Take an automatic tax increase off the table, avoid a default, and then you still don't do the hard things. This is probably the only time in our lifetime we have the leverage to make the big spenders dial it back, and we're just not. We're going to dissipate all of our leverage in the one big beautiful bill over the big spenders. We'll have no leverage back. And that's my sticking point, is I realize this is hard. I understand and I sympathize with the difficult nature that the president's faced with, that the speaker, that Leader Thune is faced with. But they have to understand that I can't give up all the leverage.
We can't
We either accomplish this or we got to retain some leverage.
I agree. So Leader Thune wants to start a vote-a-rama tomorrow and through the weekend. One, where are you on the vote? And two, do you think this thing passes the Senate?
Well, what I'm doing is, I'm actually preparing for it. So this is just a bullet point sheet of all the elements of the bill that have a JCT or a CBO score. We don't have it yet. We don't know what the bill is yet. Went through the bird bath. Committees are kind of reworking their wording, try and get some elements that the parliamentarian kicked out. But I have this for Senate Finance, but I don't have this on all the other committees. So I don't know which individual element is in the bill and how much it scores. So again, I'm sorry, I'm going to insist that I have this information, that I can do these sheets. Then I'm also going to insist that our conference goes through every one of these elements that has a score and discusses it. I mean, should we really keep this in here? I mean, should we really be, when we're $37 trillion in debt, and projecting deficits in excess of $2 trillion, should we be cutting taxes more? Again, I don't want to increase tax. I'm happy to just extend the current tax law. I mean, if we would have been smart enough in 2017, the current tax law would have been permanent.
Yeah.
We would have actually found some savings, paid for permanence, but we didn't do that. Okay, let's not make the same mistake. So now, because we have Chairman Crapo, smart guy, said, hey, let's just use current policy. We don't have to pay for it. We can make it permanent. So I'm happy to do that because we would have done that in 2017. But what about all the new tax cuts? And listen, I appreciate that President Trump has focused on the working men and women of this country. But in addition to what he's promised, there's a whole lot of more what they call Senate and House priorities. That's what all these little red things are here, So we should go through this. Do we really increase deficit $18 billion for that person's wish list? 17 billion, 17 billion, 16 billion, 14 billion. This is real money. We need to go through each one of these lines, have the discussion in the conference, have the person who wants this, who got it inserted. Nobody ever took a vote on this stuff yet. This got inserted by leadership and committee chairs, working with members, go, hey, I really want this, insert it. That's why we're $37 trillion in debt. That completely dysfunctional, completely undemocratic process. I'm going to force this into transparency and a more democratic process. What are we going to leave in? What are we going to take out? That's how we have to do this, just in our conference. Then we'll have a bill that we can put on the floor, and kind of depends on how things shake out in the conference, whether I vote to proceed on that bill or not.
I got to be honest, I'm speechless. It just blows my mind that this is where we are. And it blows my mind when I read these stories about some of your colleagues that are like, I don't know if we can enact cuts to public broadcasting. I'm like, dude, then why are you there? In the last 30 seconds that we have, if you had to look at your crystal ball and to say Sunday night, I know the president wants to get this done before July 4th, but in 30 seconds or less, where do you think we are Sunday night?
Well, hopefully we're locked behind a door, and we're going through this line by line. What should go in, what should go out on a democratic process. Okay, colleagues, let's vote on this stuff. Rather than just have this shoved down our throats, let's discuss each one of these elements. We haven't done that. We've discussed things in general. Crapo's been great in finance of kind of letting us look at these things. But again, now we're down to crunch time. Now we've actually got a bill that's being assembled with individual elements, individual scores. Let's go through that. Again, I don't see us getting that done. Not this week. Maybe if we, get the information, get the scores, have leadership committed to, again, locking us in a room, going through an organized process, discussing, debating each one of these elements, and then voting. I mean, should we do this or not? Again, we've gone through the bird bath. Maybe we'll call this the Ron's rinse.
We need Ron's rinse. Senator Johnson, I can't tell you how much I and frankly the American people and the next generation of Americans owe you a debt of gratitude for fighting this fight. The easy answer in Washington is to roll over and do nothing. Thanks for explaining what's at stake to us. Thanks for your report. And I hope people take a look at this report and the charts. They speak for themselves. Keep up the good fight, sir.
Well, let me also put in a plug for President Trump. God bless him. I'm seeing him in the Oval Office as he's kind of wordsmithing his announcement on the ceasefire. I mean, there's a man of steel. He truly is. I cannot, again, I don't want to be a problem child. He's got a tough job. I don't want to make it more difficult. I want to be totally supportive of him. He wanted the Senate to make the bill better. I want to make it a lot better.
Good.
So we put ourselves on a path, and he would like to see that too. It's how do we get the votes? Well,
all right. Thank you, sir.
It's transparency. Thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it. All right, guys, that's an amazing show. As I mentioned, tomorrow, a killer panel to break down all the week's news. And then Friday, we'll give you an update on the big, beautiful bill with Mick Mulvaney and the way that the media narratives are ridiculous. So hit that subscribe and notification button. Always feel free to join us at 6 o'clock for the premiere. Spread the word. Share that link with 5 friends right now if you can and say, you got to watch the Sean Spicer Show. Join us in the chat in YouTube at 6 o'clock live every day Eastern. And oh, by the way, check out my free newsletter at SeanSpicer.com. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.